I wasn't searching for anything mysterious when those fountains first caught my attention. It all began with a single photograph, one of those sepia-toned pictures from the 1890s depicting an impressive public drinking fountain in San Francisco. The structure was ornate and classical, built more like a monument than something purely functional, the sort of thing you'd imagine standing before a palace instead of positioned on some ordinary street corner dispensing free water to passers-by. That's when everything started to fall apart. Because the moment I began searching for these fountains, they turned up absolutely everywhere. Not limited to San Francisco, not confined to America, but truly everywhere. Paris, London, Melbourne, Buenos Aires, Istanbul, Kolkata, one city after another, spanning continent after continent, all featuring these intricate public drinking fountains that seemed to materialize out of nowhere during the mid to late 1800s, before disappearing just as abruptly. The more deeply I investigated, the less coherent the official narrative became. Let me share what I discovered. Somewhere between 1850 and 1900, thousands and thousands of ornate public drinking fountains materialized in cities throughout the world. These weren't simple spigots or basic wells. They were architectural declarations, featuring carved granite, bronze fixtures, and multiple basins positioned at varying heights. One designated for humans, another for horses, and a third for dogs. They included artistic embellishments that served absolutely no functional purpose. Latin inscriptions, classical columns, with some towers reaching 15 or 20 feet high. The level of craftsmanship was remarkable, featuring intricate metalwork, stonework fitted with perfect precision, and hydraulic systems demanding engineering expertise, with each one being unique while somehow following similar aesthetic guidelines, and they were all free. This brings up a straightforward yet crucial question. Who financed all of this? The standard explanation suggests that wealthy philanthropists funded these fountains as charitable acts, that organizations like the Metropolitan Drinking Fountain and Cattle Trough Association in London or comparable groups in other cities commissioned these elaborate structures out of genuine concern for public health and animal welfare. However, the official explanation falls apart right here because we're not discussing dozens of fountains. We're discussing thousands in London alone. Over 800 fountains appeared between 1859 and 1879, spanning 20 years, averaging 40 fountains annually. And that's just a single city. Multiply those numbers across New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, then Paris, Berlin, Vienna, Rome, then Melbourne, Sydney, Cape Town, Bombay. The figures become absolutely staggering. Tens of thousands of these elaborate structures, all constructed within a 50-year period, all supposedly funded through charitable donations, all requiring skilled craftsmen and engineers, all appearing in cities that were supposedly just starting to develop modern water infrastructure. The coordination problem becomes completely undeniable. Here's where things get even stranger. These fountains required actual water systems, not simple wells, but pressurized municipal water supplies, pipes, pumps, reservoirs, filtration, the exact infrastructure we're told was still under development during this period. I discovered photographs of drinking fountains in remote territories, mining towns in Nevada, frontier settlements in Australia, colonial outposts in India, locations that officially didn't even have proper roads, yet somehow possessed functioning public water fountains with constant flow dispensing free fresh water to anyone who required it. How exactly? Not why, not when, not under which municipal authority, but how? How did the infrastructure arrive there? Where are the records documenting who built the water mains, who maintained the pressure systems, Who ensured water quality? Who paid for continuous operation? The documentation is incredibly sparse. What we have instead are photographs. Thousands of photographs showing these fountains fully operational, surrounded by people using them as though they'd always existed. No construction photos, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies for most of them, no detailed municipal records of planning commissions or engineering surveys. They simply appear in the historical record already functioning. And that's the first impossibility. But there's a second one that's even more disturbing. Why water specifically? I mean that quite literally. Why did this supposed golden age of philanthropic giving concentrate so intensely on providing free public water? We're told it was about public health, about preventing disease, about temperance, offering water as an alternative to alcohol. But the timeline doesn't support this explanation. These fountains appeared before germ theory gained wide acceptance, before modern epidemiology existed, before most cities possessed any real understanding of waterborne disease. Yet someone invested enormous resources in creating a worldwide network of free water distribution points, decades before the scientific justification materialized. How did they know? More critically, what did they understand about water that we've forgotten? Because these weren't merely distribution points. The fountains themselves often featured mysterious design elements, specific mineral compositions in the stone, particular metal alloys in the fixtures, unusual basin shapes that appear to serve no obvious purpose. I found references in old texts to water from certain fountains, having restorative properties or particular virtues, not mystical claims, but pragmatic observations. People preferred water from specific fountains, and cities maintained their reputations. Was the water itself different? Was there something about the materials used in these fountains that affected water quality in ways we no longer comprehend? The deeper I investigated, the more I realized we simply don't know. The knowledge vanished when the fountains were destroyed, and maybe that was intentional. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you saw one of these fountains? Not a modern drinking fountain, those sterile stainless steel contraptions bolted to walls in schools and airports. I mean one of the old ones. The grand public monuments to free water, they're gone. Almost all of them. Thousands upon thousands of elaborate structures built to endure for centuries vanished within a single generation. The official explanation claims they were removed due to hygiene concerns, or because municipal water systems rendered them obsolete, or because automobiles replaced horses and made the animal basins unnecessary. But this explanation crumbles when you examine the timeline closely. These fountains didn't gradually disappear over decades as cities modernized. They vanished rapidly, often between 1910 and 1930. Cities that had maintained hundreds of functioning fountains for 50 years suddenly tore them all out within just a few years. Why the urgency? And here's the strangest aspect. There's almost no public record of the removal process, no major newspaper campaigns, no civic debates about whether to preserve these landmarks, no historical societies fighting to save them. These massive public works projects were dismantled and hauled away, and contemporary sources barely acknowledge it. It's as though an entire category of public infrastructure was deliberately erased from the urban landscape, and everyone simply accepted it. The deeper I went, the more this pattern of organized forgetting revealed itself. I need to take you back to the fountains themselves because there's something about them that doesn't align with what we're told about this era. The late 1800s, we're told, was a period of rapid industrialization, mass production, standardization. The entire point of the Industrial Revolution was efficiency, making things faster, cheaper, more uniformly. But these fountains weren't mass-produced. Each one was bespoke, custom-carved, featuring individual designs. I found fountains featuring classical mythology, Neptune, water nymphs, dolphins. I found Gothic designs with gargoyles and pointed arches. I found Egyptian motifs complete with hieroglyphics. I found Byzantine patterns, Moorish tilework, Celtic knotwork. This represents an enormous diversity of skilled craftsmanship. So where did all these stonemasons come from? Where were they trained? How did cities across the world simultaneously possess access to artisans capable of carving 15-foot granite monuments? The evidence suggests something much larger, because we're not just discussing artistic skill, we're discussing technical knowledge. These fountains had to handle water pressure. They needed freeze-proof designs in cold climates. They required drainage systems. The metalwork had to resist corrosion. The stone had to be properly sealed. This required engineering expertise applied at an architectural level, repeated thousands of times across continents by different craftsmen who somehow all understood the same principles. Not coincidence, not parallel development, but coordinated knowledge. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here's what sent me down this path completely. I started mapping the fountains using old city directories, historical photographs, and archived municipal documents. I plotted where these fountains stood, and the pattern that emerged was impossible to dismiss. The fountains weren't randomly distributed. They followed precise geometric patterns, specific intervals, almost as if someone had planned the entire network before any single fountain was built. In London, they formed concentric circles radiating from certain central points. In Paris, they aligned along sight lines connecting major landmarks. In New York, they appeared at regular intervals that didn't correspond to city blocks or property lines, but to something else, something I couldn't identify. This raises uncomfortable questions. If each fountain was supposedly the independent gift of individual philanthropists, why do they collectively form coherent geometric patterns? How did donors coordinate to fill in gaps in the network? Why would they bother? The official explanation that these were ad hoc acts of charity simply cannot account for the organized distribution pattern. It suggests planning, central coordination, a unified system. And that system appears to have served every city on Earth all at once before vanishing completely. This is where the mystery becomes genuinely unsettling. I started asking people about these fountains: historians, urban planners, architecture professors, municipal engineers, people who should know about significant public infrastructure in their cities. Almost no one did. And when I showed them the evidence, the photographs, the old maps, the archived records, I got the same response over and over: I never knew that. How is that possible? How does an entire category of public monument, thousands of structures that stood in cities for 50 years, used daily by millions of people, just disappear from collective memory? This wasn't ancient history. These fountains were still standing when our grandparents were children. There should be family stories, institutional memory, historical markers. Instead, silence. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision, city after city. The same gap in the historical record, the same absence of documentation about their removal, the same lack of public discussion about what was lost. It's as if someone wanted us to forget these fountains ever existed, and we did. Here's what kept me up at night: the timing. These fountains didn't just appear randomly across the 1800s. They appeared in a very specific window, roughly 1850 to 1900, 50 years. And that window coincides with something else that's impossible to ignore. The World's Fairs: Chicago 1893, Paris 1889, Philadelphia 1876, London 1851. City after city, hosting these massive expositions, showcasing new architecture that looked suspiciously old, classical, ornate, the same aesthetic as the fountains. And here's where it gets strange. Many of these fairs featured elaborate water features, fountains, cascades, hydraulic systems that supposedly were temporary installations built in months, then demolished immediately after. But what if they weren't new? What if the fairs were displaying what already existed? What if they were the last showcase of a previous civilization's capabilities before it was all dismantled? The pattern suggests something deliberate. The fountains appear, the fairs happen. Photography becomes widespread, just common enough to document what existed, but not common enough to have documented the construction process. Then, within a generation, it's all torn down. This is the window where Tartaria disappears from maps, where the old world becomes the new world, where classical architecture gets rebranded as Beaux-Arts revival instead of what it might actually be, remnants. The fountains appeared right at the moment of transition, right as the old infrastructure was being catalogued and removed, right as a new historical narrative was being established. And photography, that's the key. We have just enough images to know these fountains existed, but not enough to understand where they came from. It's the perfect gap. The evidence was documented just before it was erased, as if someone knew that future generations would ask questions and wanted to make sure there'd be just enough proof to haunt us, but never enough to prove anything. Once you see the timing, you can't unsee it. The evidence points to several inescapable conclusions. First, someone built a global water infrastructure network in the mid-1800s that was far more advanced and far more coordinated than official history acknowledges. Second, this network required technical knowledge, engineering expertise, and organizational capacity that shouldn't have existed in that era, not at that scale, not with that precision. Third, the system was deliberately dismantled, and its history was deliberately obscured, not lost, not forgotten through neglect, actively erased. Why? What were these fountains really for? What did they do besides provide water? What knowledge did they represent that had to be removed from public access? And who coordinated both their creation and their destruction? I keep coming back to one detail that haunts me. In the photographs of these fountains, you often see the same thing: children. Dozens of photographs showing children gathered around the fountains, filling cups, playing in the spray, drinking freely. These structures were clearly beloved. They were woven into daily life. They served a real function that people valued. And then they were taken away, and we all forgot they ever existed. What else have we forgotten? What other infrastructure existed that we no longer recognize? What other capabilities did our cities once have that have been erased from the record? Because the fountains are just what's visible in photographs. What didn't get photographed? What was so ordinary, so ubiquitous, that no one thought to document it before it vanished? The official explanation collapses here. We're supposed to believe that our civilization has been on a steady upward trajectory, that everything keeps getting better, more advanced, more sophisticated. But what if that's not true? What if we've lost things, important things? What if the Victorian era had access to knowledge and capabilities that we don't have anymore? The fountains suggest yes. I don't have definitive answers. I don't know exactly who built this network or how they did it or why it was destroyed. But I know the official story doesn't hold water. No pun intended. I know that thousands of elaborate public water fountains representing millions of hours of skilled labor and incalculable amounts of resources appeared across the world in a 50-year window. I know they required infrastructure that supposedly didn't exist yet. I know they followed organized patterns that suggest central planning. I know they were dismantled rapidly and their history was suppressed. And I know that we're not supposed to ask these questions, but I'm asking anyway. Who built these drinking fountains? Where did the knowledge come from? What did these structures really do? And most importantly, what else was taken from us when they were destroyed? The fountains are gone. The craftsmen who built them are gone. The infrastructure that fed them is gone. The records are sparse to non-existent, but the photographs remain. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Something was here, something sophisticated, something global, something that provided free, clean water to every city on Earth, housed in monuments built to last forever, and then it was erased. The question isn't whether this happened. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is, what else don't we remember? What other gifts were taken from us while we weren't paying attention? And who benefited from making us forget? I don't expect answers, not today, maybe not ever. But I know that every time I walk past a modern drinking fountain, that sad little stainless steel fixture bolted to a wall, I think about what we lost, and I wonder what else is hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. The fountains are trying to tell us something about lost knowledge, about coordinated erasure, about a world that was different than we've been told. All we have to do is look. And once we start looking, really looking at the world our ancestors built and the world we inherited, well, that's when things get interesting. Where are you watching this video from? Write in the comments which city or country you are from. We would love to know who is watching with us. Share your thoughts, observations, or questions. Every comment is important. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Together, we are creating a community of curious explorers.